Welcome to the NBA Trades Podcast. I'm your host, Raphael, and today I have a special guest. It is senior writer for The Athletic, Michael Lee. Mike, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, doing wonderful.
So thanks for coming on. We're here to talk about Rasheed Wallace and his Hawks days or Hawks day and his brief stretch with the Hawks. You covered him with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, but I wanted to get into a little bit about your start in your career at the beginning. So I listened to a previous podcast you had been on, and you said that you were interested in art and in comic strips and drawing. How did you get involved with that growing up?
That's what I always did in the house. I was, when I come home from school, I would just grab some notebook paper or any paper, and I'd doodle, I'd draw. I was just big into cartoons. I was huge into the Peanuts. That was my favorite cartoon. I was big into Charles Schultz and everybody. Snoopy was my favorite character. So I would always just draw. And eventually my drawing, moved over to clay and sculpting. And so I was just big into sculpting. I would always just, create images of my favorite NBA players. I remember when I was in high school, I had done just my 5 favorite players: Magic, Larry Bird, Michael Jordan, Patrick Ewing, and I believe it was Karl Malone at the time. I did a dream team. And I made them all the figurines just out of clay. And I wound up being on the local news. They had a little segment they used to do for like local talents, and I was on that. And I competed in national art competitions and stuff. So art is definitely my first love. It's my first passion. I thought that was going to be what I would end up doing one day. But for whatever reason, I just didn't pursue it. I didn't think there was money in it. And I landed in journalism, and I definitely don't regret that. But anybody that's known me for years or known me probably since I was a teenager knows that they probably know me more for my artwork than for anything I've done professionally as a writer.
Oh, wow. So do you still do artwork now? I know it's harder because you have such a...
It's harder. I just haven't,
job, yeah.
I haven't had time. And I just recently had a kid, and I thought that would inspire me to do some artwork for him and, as inspiration. But I just haven't had the time. Just too much stuff going on with the job and just raising a kid. It just takes a lot of energy. I think the last thing that I'd done, probably of any significance, it's been almost, I guess a couple years ago, I made a sculpture for my wife, for her birthday. And then for our wedding a long time ago, I made, the cake toppers. I made images of ourselves for that. So, but I have not done much since, and my friends that know about my interest in art always encourage me to do that as an outlet or something, but there isn't enough time in a day, honestly.
Yeah, with all this Anthony Davis.
Maybe one day when I have just all sorts of free time. I don't know when that's going to come around, but maybe one day I'll get back into it. And I know it's still in me. I didn't lose it, but I just gotta find a time and place or the inspiration to get something done.
Yeah, wow, that's really cool, and congratulations on the child. That's great to hear.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so how did you get into journalism from that point, and sort of just how did you get into that field?
Yeah, when I was around, I think it was 15, the summer before my junior year in high school, I had nothing to do, and I was into sports. I was always into sports. I would always watch ESPN and Dick Vitale and imitate him and everything. And my dad asked me if I wanted to just participate in a program with the Kansas City Association of Black Journalists. I said, cool. I did it because I had nothing else to do. And it was like a 2-week program where they taught you print journalism one week and broadcast journalism the next. And it was just something I did just to kill time. But the whole time I was there, a lot of the people who were there, they helped me out Glenn Rice, who's now at the Kansas City Star, and Lavelle Neal, who's at the Minneapolis Star Tribune. They were really instrumental in encouraging me to pursue this as a career. I really didn't have a lot of interest, but they kept saying I was natural and that I should pursue it. And I didn't think anything of it, because that summer the Kansas City Star had started something called Teen Star, and I would have been one of the first people at Teen Star, but the insurance wouldn't cover anybody under age 16. So I was not allowed to work on Teen Star. So that was something that sort of put journalism on the back burner for a while, until the next year, the University of North Carolina, in conjunction with the Freedom Forum, had a program for high school journalists called the Rainbow Institute, and they selected journalists of color for a program, spend about a month at UNC, and just get training from UNC professors and some journalism professionals. And the Kansas City Star wanted to nominate me, and I was like, I don't know if you want to do that because my only experience is from that camp, and I don't work for the school paper or anything. They nominated me, they pushed for me, and I wound up getting a job. And wound up getting the selection for the program, and that's really where everything kind of clicked for me, because I wound up meeting, some of the founders of National Association of Black Journalists, one of them being Chuck Stone, and also had an editor named Mary Wallace-Spin, who was at the Louisville Courier-Journal, who I sat down with every night, and he just gave me the whole history of just how black people wound up finding their voice in newspapers, and just how he got started as well. And I was just inspired, and just realizing that how fortunate I was to be around all these people who knew the business. And I felt like that this was my purpose at that point. And one of the requirements for the Rainbow Institute was after you return back home, you were supposed to have an internship at the local paper. The issue came up again because I was 16 at that point, but the insurance would only cover people working that were 17. so I got bumped off again. I couldn't work that summer at the Kansas City Star, but that fall, what they did was they arranged for me to work at the at one of the bureaus, because I couldn't work at the downtown office because they had an actual printing plant there. That was the main stipulation. The fact they were printing a paper there, I couldn't be there. So I went to one of the bureaus, and I worked there, bundled papers, rewrote press releases, for ads and stuff, and just I did everything, but write. And then by the end, they finally gave me a chance to write. I went to the editor and said, this is cool and all, but I really want to write. And the first story he gave me was about some girl who was dying of leukemia. And I was like, oh, this is how we get started. And it was, and after I wrote, they went ahead and said, okay, you can do more. And, so from there, I just went to Kansas City Star. The next summer, I worked at Teen Star. Then I went to Florida A&M University and interned, at the Kansas City Star after my freshman year in college, at the Fort Lauderdale Sun-Sentinel after my sophomore year in college, at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution after my junior year in college, and then the AJC actually hired me before I graduated from college, which was a very slick move by them. And I realized years later that they got me. But they didn't allow me to hit the open market after I graduated. And, if you're a broke college student and somebody offers you a job, you kind of jump on it, and I did. And it was a great opportunity to work in Atlanta at one of the top papers in the country, a place where they really just covered college football, high school football, everything, just full tilt. At that time, there was sort of a period before newspapers fully crashed. It was just like they just invested a lot in putting out, being the paper of the South. That was their whole goal, was to have college football covered by everybody else. And, I would cover, say, a high school football game on Friday and then a college football game on Saturday. And the cool thing about Georgia is, like, a lot of the cities have historical references. So I was like, so tonight I'm in Rome and tomorrow I'm in Athens, Yeah. But yeah, that was just it. But I worked there I covered high schools, Braves, and colleges. Just did a little bit of everything. mostly high schools. And then my fourth year there, an opportunity came up for me to cover the Hawks because, unfortunately, the longtime beat writer Jeff Denberg had come down with a brain tumor, and he actually collapsed at a game. And at the time, the Hawks were dreadful. They were horrible, one of the worst teams in the NBA, and they couldn't find anybody on staff who wanted to go cover the games. And I was jumping up and down, raising my hand, like, please, 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 let me go. I will cover the team if you don't have anybody else. And they gave me a chance. And the deal was that I could cover the Hawks as long as I took care of my high school duties. So I actually was doing two jobs at the time. I was covering high schools and on the road covering NBA games. So it was a challenge, but I knew that if I had the opportunity that I wasn't going to let it slip, and I was going to try to make the most of it. And so, yeah, that's how I wound up getting the Hawks beat. The next season, Jeff was able to recover, and so we wound up covering the team as a tandem for that year, and kind of help him get back, get his strength. Unfortunately, he wound up passing the next season, and the beat was mine all to myself. And that happened to be the year that the Hawks made the trade for Rasheed Wallace.
Oh, wow. And it's funny, I used the Wayback Machine. Thank you to the Wayback Machine. And I went on
Sorry if it was too much.
No, it was really interesting because, like, I went on the Wayback Machine for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution to sort of dig in and try and find some of those old stories from that time that you wrote. And, you know, I did see that, like, going on the sports page that you wrote about high school, college, the Braves. Like in 1999 during their playoff run, I saw a couple of, like, stories on the sports page.
Yeah, I got to cover the World Series, which was just crazy. You know, in 99. I still remember the first time that during the 1998 home run chase with Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa, you know, I got a one-on-one with Sosa, which was probably one of the weirder interviews I ever did. It was crazy just because, you know, this is my first year. I was just out of college, and they said just go to the park and, you know, do something on Sammy Sosa. I was like, oh, all right. And so I was in the locker room pregame, not locker room, the clubhouse pregame, and I was, like, so nervous. I was trying to figure out how to approach Sammy. I didn't know what to say to him. I didn't know how to you know, start this interview with him. And so I was just kind of standing off in a corner, kind of pacing, you know, while everybody's in the locker room or clubhouse. And by the end, there were only two people left in the clubhouse. It was me and Sammy Sosa. And I was like, now it's awkward, okay? So I either have to go walk up the steps of the hill, or he's going to think I'm just some weirdo. And so I went up to him and asked him if he had a couple of minutes. And he said, sure. He said, let me take care of something. He went back to the restroom or something and came back. And then we sat there and talked. And I was like, cool. So, yeah, so it was a lot of fun. I loved that experience I had at the AJC because, like I said, they gave me a taste of everything. You know, I got a chance to cover the Olympics in '04, and that was a great experience. So, but yeah, it was 6 years, first 6 years of my career, and that was where the foundation was set.
Yeah, and those, like you said with the Hawks situation, that nobody wanted to cover them, which I actually went back on YouTube and tried to find games that they played at home, because I wanted to see just how bad the crowd presence was at certain games.
It was awful.
Yeah, and I was very shocked at just sort of, because for me, like, I was a little bit, I was in middle school around that time when they were at that time, like in 2004 around that time, and just looking at some of the home games, seeing how empty it was, and only it would be filled if maybe Michael Jordan and the Wizards were playing, or
the Lakers,
and it'd be like such a stark contrast.
And they would always lie on the attendance figures. We always get these bogus attendance figures. It's like, you know, 11,000, 12,000. I'm like, hold up. And I remember one time, me and a couple of people who were with the Associated Press and a couple other reporters were like, okay, we're actually going to physically count the number of people in this arena tonight, because there's no way. If they give us a number that's like 10,000, 11,000, we're going to have to blow it up. And we did. We actually said, okay, you can get the 300 section, you can get the 200. And we went and we counted out the number of people, and we couldn't get more than 2,500 people in that arena.
Oh wow, yeah,
on that game. And
yeah.
so yeah, it was bad. It was bad. They were a totally irrelevant team.
Yeah, and it was weird, like sort of looking at their building process at that time because they were a good team in the late '90s with Mookie Blaylock and Steve Smith and
Steve Smith,
Mutombo,
Kimbe.
and they were a very good team. And then sort of when they traded Blaylock and Steve Smith, they
Steve
sort of had
Smith
to
for
rebuild.
J.R.
And
Ryder.
yeah, and that
Yeah.
sort of fell apart.
The J.R. Ryder trade is what set everything back. It improved. They wanted to get some edge, and they wound up falling over the ledge.
Yeah, yeah. I had Pete Babcock on my podcast a few years ago, and he said that was the trade that he really does regret the most. The trading Steve Smith for Ryder, just because of the the impact in the locker room.
Latrell Sprewell just destroyed them in the previous playoffs, and they were just like, "Hey, Latrell's got this edge. He choked his coach, and look at him. We need some of that in Atlanta." And he just picked the wrong player. Sometimes you can have too much edge. There's one thing about edge and having being a little gritty. There's another thing about being crazy and destructive.
Yeah, it could be pretty destructive, and the Hawks really suffered for it. And by 2001, they were forced to trade Dikembe Mutombo. They went under another rebuild, essentially with their team. And then they trade for Shareef Abdur-Rahim at the draft, traded the draft rights to Pau Gasol. And so the team really changes. Jason Terry's probably the one consistent. He was drafted in 1999 by the team. And they start to rebuild around Shareef, and then they get Glenn Robinson later on. And so that's sort of their team. They're sort of expecting to compete for a playoff spot because they have a former All-Star in Robinson. Shareef Abdur-Rahim had been an All-Star. Theo Ratliff had been an All-Star. Jason Terry was seen as a young player who was a big-time scorer and could potentially become an All-Star if he's on a better team. And the team sort of, they had playoff expectations for that year, 2002-2003. They were 35 and 47.
They made a guarantee. They made a playoff guarantee.
Wow.
They said, "We will make the playoffs or your money back." It was one of the worst marketing schemes. It's one of the reasons why Lon Kruger is in college basketball again.
And especially in the East at that time, to not make the playoffs is very hard because teams in the East, the 8th seed usually is winning 40 games, maybe 39
or less
somewhere around
during that period.
So that's a very low bar, and so that for that team that was a disappointment. So going into the 03-04 season, they didn't really have a lot of expectations because of how disappointing that season was. They traded Glenn Robinson too, so they were a very different team than before.
And not only that, they actually they had a 2003 lottery pick that they traded to Milwaukee in the Glenn Robinson trade, and it was top 3 protected. And if I'm not mistaken, they came one ping pong ball from getting the number 1 pick, so they missed out on LeBron.
Wow. Well, that would have changed things, right?
And then wound up dropping the 8th and having given that pick to Milwaukee, and it turned out being T.J. Ford. So yeah, so they were bad, but they also had bad luck too. So it was not a good time to be a Hawks fan.
Yeah, and their team was really interesting. Like I said, going through the Wayback Machine, I read a story that you wrote about Shareef and sort of how he was viewed as this player who was a star or a guy on a bad team who put up a lot of points. And there was sort of division because you had a lot of quotes from different executives and coaches around the league, from Pat Riley to other people, who sort of, like, some would say, I think Pat Riley said, "Oh, well, he's just another guy who puts up a lot of numbers on a bad team." And then other coaches and people around the league said he is a really good player. And for him, I could tell that it did gnaw at him a little bit that he was never able to really win games as a player who had been an All-Star, had won a gold medal.
20 and 10. 10. He was a guy that you could pencil in for 20 and 10. But that was when I first started covering the game, and I didn't, you see these numbers, and I had played fantasy ball, and he was on my team, so he would always give me good production before when he was with Vancouver, when he was with the Grizzlies, And so I was always a fan of his game. But, you know, as you watch and you see over time, like why guys don't win, and you realize that there's a lot more that goes into, you know, a team game than just having an individual who puts up stats. And, you know, sometimes it's how quickly you make a decision in the post, your decisiveness, your decision, your ability to pass at a double team. You know, so you may be able to get numbers, but it also sometimes it may come at the detriment of the team if everybody's just standing around watching you, if no one's cutting and so that means you're just kind of out there on an island just getting your numbers, but it's not really doing a lot to help towards winning. And so actually being around him and seeing a guy who I knew worked hard, who I knew cared about winning, who I knew like wasn't out there just trying to just be selfish and get numbers, but there are different things that you have to do to be a winner. And so I think being around him and covering him early, I learned that. But I didn't realize that when I first started covering the team, because it's just like you say, oh, this guy averages 20 points and 9 rebounds, and what's the problem? You know, but how does he go about getting that 20 and 9, and how hard does it make it on everyone else to play around him? And that was mainly the issue and why he never was able to be a part of a successful team his entire career.
Yeah, and eventually he did get traded with Dan Dickau and Theo Ratliff to the Blazers for Wesley Person and Rasheed Wallace. Now the team was 18-35 at this point, and I guess you could say like that experiment with Shareef and Theo had failed. You know, Theo was a big time shot blocker too. What did you think about the trade when they first made that move to get Rasheed Wallace? Now I know the big thing was he was an expiring contract too. They were focused on having expiring contracts and having flexibility down the road.
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of something that was bound to happen because, you know, you mentioned Pete Babcock, he got fired. He was replaced by Billy Knight. And Billy Knight knew Shareef. He worked in the Grizzlies organization when they were in Vancouver. And so he's familiar with everything about him. He knew all about his game. He actually traded
him, yeah. Yeah, I thought that was interesting.
For Pau Gasol. So I think that it was sort of an expectation that something was going to happen. The team was not playing well. They had a coach, Terry Stotts, you know, I think he's in his first full season as coach, and things weren't really going well. They had signed Steven Jackson as a free agent, and you know, he had a couple of run-ins with with Stotts at the time. For me, they're highly entertaining. Because Jackson was a guy, Steven Jackson, everybody knows him now as being outspoken. Imagine him being young and not really knowing anything and being still outspoken. So he provided a lot of entertainment for me. He and Jason Terry were really connected, and things I found out later that I didn't know at the time. But like, you know, Steven Jackson would hang out. He hung out with 2 Chainz, you know, and like he would hang out. He was really big in the rap scene at the time. So those guys were having a lot of fun during that stretch in Atlanta. But yeah, so the team was sort of they had to do something, and Billy sort of had his assignment was basically to start all over and to hit the reset button on the franchise. And the easiest way to do that was by moving Shareef, moving Theo Ratliff, and getting out from under a lot of the contracts that were just gonna tie up their cap space for years. So, you know, and Rasheed Wallace was the biggest expiring contract out there. So I remember when they made the trade, and you know, I was like, wow, they got Rasheed. And like for me, I love Rasheed. You know, like I was like, oh, it's gonna be great. I get to cover Rasheed. But once they got there, it just felt weird. Like I'm like, you know what? They're gonna flip him. You know, so you kind of had a sense that he was just there to try to you know get some more pieces. You know, they were able to you know get cap space, but now they could flip him for something else, draft picks or something else. But I remember when Rasheed got traded, he had a press conference, and it was right after the trade deadline, or right after the All-Star break or something. It was right after the All-Star break and just before the trade deadline. And so Rasheed showed up in the gym, and he answered every question. He was as nice as could be. He answered every question. He was willing to talk and hang around afterward. Maybe because he knew he wasn't going to do it too much with the Atlanta media. But it was really cool. And I remember I enjoyed talking to him. But the impression that I got, from that conversation and even from, people within the organization was that he wasn't going to be long for the Hawks. And so a lot was kind of riding on. They had a road trip coming up. They played the New Jersey Nets, and then they were going to play the Miami Heat. So I remember after they traded Shareef, going in the locker room and talking to Jason Terry and Steven Jackson and everybody. And everybody kind of just gave, oh, well, it's a business. The organization got to do what's best for the organization. We all know, what we signed up for. If things aren't working out, you got to make moves, blah, 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 blah. It was just really kind of just like, matter of fact, yeah, good luck to Theo and Shareef, but, that's just how it goes, And so, when we got to New Jersey for that game, the whole time I was just sort of just in shock. As Rasheed was getting dressed in the locker room before the game, and I was like, oh my gosh, Rasheed Wallace is about to play for the Hawks. Like, Rasheed Wallace is like, all-star, one of the best power forwards in the game is about to play for the Hawks. And I remember going to watching the game and just sort of sitting there in awe like the entire time. And Rasheed didn't have the best game. Like, he was jacking up a lot of shots. I think he had 20 points.
He shot 8 for 24. I just pulled up the box score.
Yeah, it was not the most efficient performance, but he brought this certain energy and this confidence, and I could just see, like, for the first time all season, like, the guys went on the floor like they thought they were the baddest team in the league. And I mean bad meaning good. Like, Jason Terry and Steven Jackson were like, yo, man, like they felt like just this energy, like, yo, man, we are going to beat the Nets. And this is when the Nets were good, they just come off back-to-back finals appearances. So they were a really good team. So the Hawks had Joel Pisbilla on that squad. And Joe Pisbilla had gotten tangled up with Rodney Rogers during this stretch, and so I don't know if you know Rodney Rogers. He's this big, just muscular guy.
Yeah.
And so they had a little shoving match, but Joel didn't back down. So they called timeout to kind of calm everybody down. And Rasheed was like, yeah, Joel, don't back down. And that wound up being like my lead, because it was just sort of that this one game, you just felt this different vibe with the Hawks. You felt this kind of excitement. That, no matter how long Rasheed was going to be there, if he was just going to play out the season in a Hawks uniform and then go to the highest bidder in free agency, or if he was going to be flipped right away by the deadline, because I think it was only a couple of days before the deadline. It was just it was probably the most confident that they had been, even though they lost the game. So they left, and I remember going to the locker room afterward, and Rasheed, a lot of people don't know this, I'm from Kansas City, Rasheed Wallace is from Philadelphia, but his favorite football team is the Kansas City Chiefs. And a lot of people don't know this, but he's a huge Kansas City Chiefs fan. To this day, he's a big-time Kansas City Chiefs fan. You will see him wearing Kansas City Chiefs jerseys now. He still really supports that team. He was just not an Eagles fan. Everybody in his neighborhood was an Eagles fan. For some reason, he just really fell in love with Derek Thomas and that crew. And so he latched on to the Chiefs, and that's been his team ever since. So when I walked in the locker room, he's putting on a Derek Thomas jersey and Kansas City Chiefs Air Force One. So no one else in the locker room admit nothing else to anyone else in there. But for me, I was hyped up. I was like, I said, what's up with all this Chiefs gear? And so he told me the story. I was like, oh yeah, I'm a Chiefs fan. I was like, oh, I'm from Kansas City. He's like, oh, okay, cool. So we started, going back and forth about the Chiefs and everything. And so it's kind of cool. Like, I was like, oh, so if Rasheed's around here for a while, we'll be able to talk about the Chiefs, and I'll have an in, But it got me nowhere because he was gone within a couple of days. So anyway, so they go to Miami, and they were going to practice on the day of the trade deadline, but they I guess they decided to just cancel practice. And so I think I had like lunch or something with Terry Stotts, or just sat down with Terry Stotts that day, just not for a story. We just kind of get a sense of his vibe of the team, and just what was going to happen with the trade deadline. So we sat down and we talked, and then and so I went to the team hotel. So as I show up at the team hotel, I saw Rasheed Wallace standing out front, standing outside of the hotel, about to get in the cab to go somewhere, go get something to eat, and for lunch or whatever. And I looked at Rasheed and saw him get in the car, and I was like, well, I wonder if he'll be back, with the team. And so obviously he got traded, and and so I was getting the details of the trade and everything, and so I figured I might as well just hang out in the lobby of the hotel, because the guys are going to be, coming in. I might be able to get a reaction to the trade. And it was funny because Steven Jackson comes in, first, and he's depressed. Okay,
I can imagine.
But everything that they said about trading Theo and Shareef, it was not like that with trading Rasheed. Rasheed had been there one game, practiced with them maybe twice. Okay, you would have thought that they lost their best friend, or that their tall guy. I mean, he was sick. He was sick. Like the whole time, he was like, "Man, what are we doing? I can't believe this." And so he was furious that they traded Rasheed Wallace, and he was hurt. Like he was like, "Man, we were they were crushed by the Hawks trading a guy who they played with one game." With Shareef and Theo, was like, "Oh, it's a business." They were crushed. And so I saw Jason Terry. He felt the same way, and he was sick. Everybody's feeling horrible that they made this trade. They traded Rasheed Wallace. Like I said, it was been there one game, but they were broken. They were defeated. And that I'm trying to remember the specifics of the trade. I think they got Bob Sura from Detroit.
They got Bob Sura, a first rounder from Detroit. That they ended up getting Josh Smith, drafting Josh Smith.
Yep. And
Zaliko Rabracha too is another, and Chris Mills too. I guess those guys were like expiring contracts, but
I don't think Chris Mills ever showed up. I think he was done for the year when they traded for him. They just had to get the contracts to match up, and they didn't really care whether he showed up or not. So it was funny because being in Miami, and I could be mistaken. I haven't double checked, but if I remember, that wasn't that game. Never mind. I was thinking of Dwayne Wade that went off the next night, but that was a previous game in Miami. So it was a cool thing just to see that kind of come together, and that Rasheed game still to this day is one of the most fun experiences I ever had on the beat. I've been covering the NBA now for I guess 17 years now. And that game still stands out to me. It's just one of the most fun, mainly because it's almost like if you could just pick a superstar player and just put them in a random jersey for one game, whether it's say Kobe wound up playing one game with the Wizards, what? Why is he in his Wizards uniform? Just pick a guy, Kevin Garnett playing one game for, I don't know,
for the Charlotte, the Hornets,
for the Utah Jazz, for the Charlotte Hornets. Like, why is he here? That's what it was, because Rasheed was such a huge piece, and if you remember, Rasheed's cut the check, quote, that actually came after a Hawks game. I was in Portland, and I did my story. The Hawks lost to Portland. So I didn't really know what had gone on in the locker room with the Trailblazers. And this was before, social media, when everybody just tweets out the quotes and you just kind of know what happens after every game. This is like if you read what somebody says on the opposing team, when you read it in the paper or you watch it on the news. So I woke up in my hotel that morning, and it was like there was so much going on with the Jailblazers, and everybody was angry, and just all the time it was just such a negative energy around. They just had so much talent. They still were pretty decent. And I just remember seeing Rasheed Wallace like on my TV watching it and saying, yeah, CTC, man, as long as they CTC, cut the check. As long as they CTC, I'm with whoever's going to CTC. So the Hawks CTC for one game. And it moved on for Rasheed. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah, and like the specific quotes, I actually found the story through the Wayback Machine. And Steven Jackson said he remembered that game with Rasheed against the Nets as some of the best ball we've played all season. Jason Terry said, we had chemistry right away. We talked after the game. Wallace said that this was the most fun he's had playing basketball in 3 to 4 years, period. And Jason Terry said, I felt the same way out there on the court. So it really did change things for a lot of these guys. And I could imagine the disappointment. But it is amazing when you think about it because of his effect on Detroit and sort of just how he transformed that team from a fringe contender to make the NBA Finals, but really into a championship team. And sort of it really does
turned it all around.
Speak to his impact.
And not only that, you got to think about it this way too. He was the last guy, the last like star player traded at the deadline to win a championship that same season. And when you think about just that season, for him to be moved twice, to kind of have to start over, and then wind up in Detroit. But it just says so much about him and just how he was able to fit in any system, but how the Pistons were the perfect place for him to go because they just needed somebody. Now, we talked about edge earlier. He had that edge, but he wasn't crazy. He may yell at refs and he may have done a lot of things to get those technicals, but when it came to playing basketball, he was the best teammate you could ever think of having because he was unselfish. He was a willing passer. He was so skilled. He had the talent to probably be a Hall of Fame player, but he just didn't want all that pressure on himself. He didn't want all the attention on him. He wanted to be a part of a team. That goes back to just his upbringing in Philadelphia and playing at Simon Gratz and going to North Carolina and playing under Dean Smith. He just had a mentality of, I'm going to do it, helps my team win. If that means I have to score 25 tonight, I'm going to score 25 tonight. But I don't want to have to score 25 every night. I want my teammates to get off. I want everybody to feel like they're part of this because, I might be talented, but my talents are wasted if I'm not using them to help everybody else look good and play well. And that's why I say, you see the spirit that he brought to them in just that one game. It just sort of, you could sense it, just from talking to the guys. You could see the devastation that he was traded after one game. And you could also see how he uplifted the Pistons just by his presence because, if he could make a lottery team feel like they were the best team in the world, imagine what he did with a playoff team, and that's what he did, and that's why they were able to destroy the Lakers the way they did in the finals. I mean, obviously the Lakers had their own issues, chemistry, and Shaq and Kobe, but Rasheed was a difference maker, and, he landed in the perfect place with, Larry Brown, coach of the Pistons, but also a North Carolina product. He had Ben Wallace, a fellow Wallace, no relation, but just somebody who had that kind of just dog determination and just, really just grind it out. And he was just a hard worker. And then you had, Chauncey and Rip and Tayshaun and just guys who had the ability to do so much on the offensive end, but were also really ready to make the sacrifice. And, I give Joe Dumars a lot of credit because he assembled a roster that had players who had flaws, but just countered them with another player who made up for those flaws. So while Chauncey wasn't probably the best shooter, you paired him with a Rip Hamilton, and he's going to spread the floor and do that. And then you got a defender like Tayshaun, who's just so wiry but is long, but he can defend multiple positions. Then you have Rasheed and Ben, who in tandem could just say, okay, you're going to guard Shaq for this amount of time, and then I'm going to guard him. Or you're going to guard this guy. And they were able to just sort of be booking bigs and just make life hell for you. They did that to Tim Duncan the next year in 2005, even though they wound up losing that series. But it was just having those guys who just were all about team, who had humongous chips on their shoulder. I mean, Ben being an undrafted guy, the first undrafted person to ever be voted into the All-Star game. Chauncey had a chip from being a top 3 pick who bounced around the league and, could never find a home until he landed in Detroit.
Yeah.
Rip Hamilton was rejected by Michael Jordan because he didn't think he had the heart. And so he had a chip on his shoulder. And obviously, Tayshaun, the guy who slipped, in the draft, who probably shouldn't have been taken as low as he was, but he was, and then had to beat out Michael Curry, who he was better than his rookie year, and then got a chance toward the end. So you have all of these personalities, and then you add Rasheed Wallace, who, had sort of worn out his welcome in Portland, who didn't handle the glare, the intensity of being the face of a franchise. It just wasn't how he was built. And I think a lot of the pressures that he felt, a lot of the just sort of, that a lot of the pressure for him to perform and to kind of be that guy every night, he couldn't really handle it to that extent. But that's what Portland needed him to be, and he just wasn't mature enough, and that kind of manifests itself in him kind of losing it, with referees and calls didn't go his way. At least that's just my theory. But I just think he had that edge where he knew that if he's in the right system and he doesn't have to carry the team and he can just carry it on the nights that he's rolling and doesn't have to be fed 20 shots a game. If he's in the right system, the right culture, you saw what happened. And the Pistons were just a fun team, and he wound up buying everybody championship belts. I don't know if we'll ever see anything like that. I don't know if we'll ever see a guy join a team and in 2 months just it all comes together. I mean, the Lakers came close with Pau Gasol 4 years later. That was one of those perfect fit trades that didn't ruffle anything, didn't cause any problems, just a perfect fit, helped exalt Kobe to MVP level. But since then, there hasn't been any kind of success that compares. You just don't find it where it just clicks and it's just like there's immediate magic. But now looking back, when you look at just that little stretch of him playing with the Hawks in that 36 jersey, did you get the story for number 36?
No, I actually I never saw it. Why did he choose number 36?
Yeah, no, it's not funny. It's actually very serious. I asked him about it, and why he wore 36. Because I'm always big on numbers. To me, numbers have meaning, but he wore number 36 because he had a brother who died at age 36.
Oh wow.
And I think he wanted to honor his brother. And so he wore 36 with the Hawks. That was the first time he wore 36 because he had won 30 his whole career. And when he got traded to Detroit, if I'm not mistaken, number 36 wasn't available. He wound up getting 30. And then the next year, I think he switched back to 36, and that's the number he played with the rest of his time in Detroit. But yeah, he wore 36 to honor the age of his late brother, who died at that age. And I think it was sort of a symbol to him that, he needs to live a healthy life and sort of get back on track. And I think it was something that he was very conscious of, leaving later in his career and when he retired, to make sure that, he took care of his body and that, because he didn't want to, have a heart situation or anything else, because of just a poor diet and stuff. So, yeah, so there's a lot of depth to Rasheed. And I think he got kind of caught up in just being in Portland and just not handling all that led to just a negative perception. But being in Detroit and just being in Atlanta for that short stretch, being around his teammates, I came to just appreciate him, I always was a fan of his game, but when I saw just the way he just for being around the team for less than a week, just gave him so much of a boost. It was pretty amazing to see, and then to see the Pistons just skyrocket from there and go on to win a championship. Rasheed Wallace, he won't. I don't think he'll go in the Hall of Fame. I doubt it. But he definitely had Hall of Fame talent, and he had a Hall of Fame impact on the Pistons. For that year, they won a championship, and I don't think they do anything differently.
Yeah, that's a pretty incredible team. I mean, I remember as adolescent, like at that age, I was a Pacers fan. So seeing them play the Pistons in the conference finals, you just didn't know who was going to come alive. But every game, someone stepped up, whether it was Rip Hamilton or Rasheed had a big game, or Tayshaun with the block on Reggie, or all of that type of stuff. So it was a very tough team and just really great. So on the Hawks side, at that time, they were also going through a ownership change. Time Warner, AOL, they sold the team to the Atlanta Spirit.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of stuff going on with that team, and that season towards the end, what I remember most was just Bob Sora trying to get a triple double and throwing up the
Bob Sora actually he was trying to get a triple double for three straight
third
games.
straight game, yeah.
Yeah, he had back-to-back triple doubles, and like it was funny because the Hawks were clearly trying to tank. Like when they traded Rasheed, it was like, okay, we're punting the season. We're not trying to win anything. But Bob Sora came in there and like he made. I can say that the last stretch of the season with like him and Sora and
Jason Terry, Steven Jackson, I know, like had a bunch of big games. Yeah.
Yeah, they all had like humongous games, and it was just kind of fun to see them come together. And another guy who was on that team, Boris Diaw, was on that squad as well. So it was cool just to see those guys play that year just totally free, just unburdened. I mean, Steven Jackson was clearly motivated to get paid. He was about to be hit free agency again that summer.
Because he had the situation with the Spurs where he took less money to sign with the Hawks, and I know that's sort of a forgotten.
The Spurs, I think the Spurs offered him like 3 years, $15 million, or 5 years, $15 million, something like that. Whatever it was, he thought he was worth a lot more. I think it was 5 years, 15, and he didn't want to take that, so he signed 1 year, $1 million against his agent's wishes. Like Dan Fagan was his agent. He did not want him signing with the Hawks for $1 million. Like he felt like that was just too risky of a move, but he felt like Atlanta was going to give him a chance to sort of play and put up numbers, and then wound up getting paid, and he did. He got traded to Indiana for Al Harrington. Yeah, and that worked out for him because he got a huge contract. And that summer, Jason Terry wound up being traded to Dallas. Yeah. Because they had just lost Steve Nash to Phoenix. So that was the year. I mean, once Atlanta Spirit took over, Billy Knight was the GM. Like you got the sense that his job was to start it all over, hit the reset button on the franchise, and he did. I mean, he blew it up in a major way. And getting rid of two big pieces in that Rasheed trade was really kind of the first step. I think he also traded. Did he trade Nazir Muhammad that year too?
Yeah, right before the Rasheed trade, he traded Nazir Muhammad to the Knicks.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. He traded him on the day of the All-Star game. The All-Star game was in L.A. that year, and he traded him. I think that was a trade. It was a 3-team trade.
Yeah, Tim Thomas.
And that's how Tim Thomas.
Keith Van Horn.
And I think that's how they got Prisbilla from the Bucks.
Yeah,
if I'm not mistaken. So like when Prisbilla and Rasheed played together that day, that one game, like that was the only time they played together, but that was the first time they had played together because it was the first game after the All-Star break. So I remember writing this trade story, having to write a trade story and cover the All-Star game. And everybody's walking up to me like, well, you don't have a light day today, do you? I said, nah, I got a pretty hectic day. So I had to write like pretty much all day, because there was the big trade for the Hawks kind of set the stage for, what they're eventually going to do. And then, had to write an All-Star game story. But it was fun. I mean, I still look back at those days. It's just, being kind of that was my second year, second full year, covering the team. And it was fun, because everything was new and exciting. And that's why I think that's why I trade. That's why, having Rasheed there for one game, it's still like one of my favorite memories, just covering the NBA. And, when my son asked me about, maybe one day asked me about what it was like covering the league, or I'm going to talk about Rasheed Wallace's only game with the Hawks. And I remember writing all these funny stories afterwards, like after he got traded. It's like, Rasheed Wallace I think he was like from like third. He had the third highest scoring average in Hawks history. It's like at 20 points a game, because like Lou Hudson and Dominic Wilkins and Rasheed Wallace. So it was cool. I kept making just ridiculous jokes or references to the Rasheed Wallace game, just because it was a ridiculous situation. We've never seen anything before or after where a guy is just with the team for one game and winds up going somewhere, and not just going somewhere, but winning a championship the same year. So it'd be cool. Like I would love for Rasheed to it'd be cool if he would just go down and take us through that journey of just how he went through that season. Because to me, that had to be a lot, from dealing with all the negativity in Portland and just knowing how that whole situation got sour. And then to end that season as a champion, that's a remarkable story.
Yeah, that would be really, really interesting. Okay, so I guess as a quick lightning round, just to end this off, I guess I'll ask you about some players at that time covering. Like you said, Jason Terry and Steven Jackson were really close that year. What were they like as people on and off the court, just covering them that year?
They were cool. I think that how we have these rules now about demanding trades. There was a point during that year where he had wound up being upset about things. He got into an argument with the coach and staff, and so he told me one day after practice, like, I don't want to be here. If they don't want me here, they need to get rid of me. So he basically made a trade demand in print. And that was pretty interesting. And I think also during that season, Theo Ratliff had made some comments that were critical of Terry Stotts. And so there came a point where players were just popping off. Like whenever I walked in the locker room, I would basically just ask one question and somebody would have something to say. And and so at one point, I remember going to practice and no players were available. The Hawks said that we're not making any players available to the media today. And I could only take it as personally because I was the only person who was with the team every day. The Hawks, like I said, no one really cared about the Hawks in Atlanta. And so every practice, every game, I'm in there. I'm asking every question. For game nights, the AP showed up a lot. But practices, that was pretty much on me. And so if players had a lot to say, they would just basically say it to me. So one of my favorite stories about Steven Jackson and Jason Terry was Jason was he is now. He was always good with the media. He was always gonna answer every question. He was always gonna, feed your notebook with just kind of cool, quotes and everything, just basically what he was in Dallas and everywhere else at every stop of his career. So I always enjoyed dealing with Jason, and Jackson was colorful in a different way. So after the trade, after they traded Shareef and Theo Ratliff, and then they traded Rasheed and everything kind of settled down and they came back home. This is something that probably doesn't happen anymore, but back then, like I said, I was often the only guy at every game. So a lot of times pregame, I would just go in Terry Stotts' office, and it would just be me and him talking. And, sometimes I would quote what he says, and most of the time we would just be in there just talking, just about everything, about the team, about whatever. And so after the trades, and they were back in Atlanta, I said, hey, you, Shareef and Theo were your captains. Who are your captains now? I guess is it Jet and Steven? And Jason and Steven, and he was like, well, I guess so. I mean, they're the last two guys left. I guess they're the captains, So I went to in the locker room after that, and Jason and Steven were in there. So I went up to Jason, and I said, hey, Jason, I just talked to Terry, and he said that now that Shareef and Theo are gone, that you and Steven are probably the team captain. So Jason gave me this great answer about how we got to step up and be the leaders. We the guys here. Everybody got to look up to. And he gave me this great answer. Great. Like I said, Jason Terry was a great quote. Great quote. And he said exactly what you expect somebody in his position to say. Then there's Steven Jackson. So I walk over to Steven Jackson and I say, hey, Steven, I just was talking to Terry, and he said that that now that Shareef and Theo are gone, that you and Jason are the captains. And then he just started shaking his head like, oh, man, I don't know about that. And I was like, what do you mean? He said, man, I don't know, man. Like, what? Like, they going to put, like, a C on my jersey or something? Like, is that what they going to do? Like, I'm going to get a C on my jersey or something? I was like, I don't know. Maybe. He's like, well, I'll just say this. I'll do it, but I don't want no C on my jersey. If anything, I want my set on my jersey. He said he wanted his set on his jersey.
Oh, my God.
And all I could do was just look at him like, oh, thanks, Steve. I appreciate that. I'm going to use this quote because it's hilarious. But you a fool. You're a fool. So, yeah, that was probably one of my favorite interactions with those guys. Like I said, Steven had an incident early in the year where he wound up getting suspended. They had lost to Cleveland. This was early in the season, before they realized that this thing was not going to work. This was earlier in the year. And they lost a game in Cleveland. Before Cleveland was really good, before LeBron was he was still a star. Everybody knew who he was, but he wasn't like LeBron yet. So they lost the game. It was a bad loss. And I just remember standing outside the locker room for a long time after the game. And all you heard was just yelling. You don't know what was being said, but you just heard somebody screaming, right? So coming to find out, it was Steven Jackson. And he wasn't just yelling, he was cursing out Terry Stotts in the locker room. And it was a long tirade, right? So they wound up suspending Steven Jackson for a game for conduct detrimental to the team. So with the suspension rules, that means that, you're banned from the arena, you're banned from the game, you're just not with the team that day. So they had a home game. And so I went to shoot around and that morning to kind of get more information on the suspension or whatever. And so I waited and I wound up writing something. And as I was leaving to go to my car to head back home, get ready for the game, Steven Jackson is there. Yeah. I'm like, Steven, what are you doing here? Like, you got suspended. You're not supposed to be here. He's like, I had to pick up some stuff. I left the stuff here. I need to come pick it up. So I'm just going to pick this up and leave. And I was like, oh, well, while you're here, can I ask you about the suspension? And he was like, yeah, what you want to know? And I was like, well, first, how do you feel, about suspension? And Steven kind of was like, well, I apologize, but I ain't sorry. And I said, thank you, Steven. I will be able to do something with this. So Steven was a guy that I enjoyed talking to a lot, even, on and off the record. And it was cool because, like I said, I was pretty young then. So guys, I was able to relate to guys, about music. We talked about music, sometimes talked about politics, and I, sometimes I would go hang out, go to the club, and not be in the same spot as these guys. And so, that was back when I was much younger. Still in my 20s and having a good time. But yeah, so it was just a great experience, and I got to learn a lot. Sometimes I had to educate players. I remember Steven had told me that he was going to opt out of his contract, and so he told me that he was going to opt out of his contract, which made sense because it was an option for $1 million, and if he was going to get paid, then he was going to have to opt out. So I wrote the story, quoted him straight up, saying he was going to opt out. He's going to explore his options in the summer, and that was basically it. And I wrote the story saying Stephen Jackson will opt out of his contract, become a free agent this summer. I had a quote from him explaining it, and that was it. So I woke up that morning, and I saw in the paper, the headline said, Stephen Jackson will not return to the Hawks next season. And I said, what? Because nowhere did I say that in the story. I laid out that, the Hawks were interested in bringing him back, but, they understand that, they can't, he's not going to come back for $1 million. So it's kind of a simple story, basically he's opted out. But at no point did I write or did he say that he was not coming back. And then even the story made it explicitly clear the Hawks were still interested in bringing him back, and they were. They wound up signing him and trading him to Indiana. So, even if they didn't plan on keeping him, they were planning on signing him because they still saw him as an asset. But anyway, so one thing that I knew at that stage is I was the only guy that was at every practice and every game that, I couldn't hide. So I walked right in the locker room, saw Steven in there pregame, and just walked straight to Steven. Like, didn't even give him a chance to confront me. Just walked straight to him. And as I walked to him, he was like, yo, that was some bull that you wrote. And he said something else, but he said, that was some bull that you wrote. And I was like, oh, I said, no. I said, what did I write? What did I write, Steven? Tell me what I wrote. He said, so you said I ain't coming back next year. I said, no, that's not what I said, Steven. I said, I said that you were opting out. And I said, now if you read what I wrote, I said, now my name, if you look at the byline, it says Bob Michael Lee. And underneath, I'm responsible for everything that comes below that. Above that, that's a copy editor who wound up writing the headline, and they made a mistake. And so guys in the locker room looking at me, they're like, what do you mean? I said, I don't write headlines. I said, all I do is write the story. I said, so everything that comes below my name is what I wrote. So everything that's above that, that's what one of my editors wrote. So the editor got it wrong. And he said, yeah, but that's still messed up. I said, I know. I said, that's why I'm here today, just to, make it clear to you what happened. I said, but know that, if you read the article. I said, did you read the article? He said, no, my mom told me. And I was like, oh, that's BS. And I was like, okay, well, if you read the article, I said, come back to me and tell me what I got wrong after my name. Below my name, if I got anything wrong there, we can debate it. But I just want to let you know the editor messed up. And, so I just want to make sure we cool. You understand? I didn't say that you not coming back next year. That's not what the article said. And so guys in the locker room was sort of clear. They understood where I came from. And I think in some ways it helped, get some respect from some of those guys because they knew that, if Steven's going to be angry, pissed off, and ready to go off on me, and I still just walk in there ready to take it, that, that I'm a stand-up dude, I guess.
Yeah. And I guess like a final one that I find interesting is Terry Stotts because, like you said, the Hawks, like his run, he had a lot of players mad at him, and just sort of his situation in Atlanta didn't really work out. In Milwaukee, he had a little bit of success, but not too much. And then really he's found a home, and really I would say he's revitalized his career in terms of just sort of how people perceive him as a coach. I feel like people sort of saw him as a retread when the Blazers initially hired him, and he's really proved a lot as a coach throughout that time with this team. What was he like in those early stages? I think this was his first real coaching stint. head coaching stint.
Yeah, I mean, at the time he was seen as like a up and coming assistant, because he had worked for George Karl for a long time in Seattle, and they had gone to the finals in '96 with Kemp and Payton, and so he was on that staff with Dwayne Casey and those guys. So they all were a team that was used to having some success. And when the Hawks hired him, as an assistant, there was a lot of word that he could eventually become the head coach because he was just one of the up and coming assistants, and so in 2002, I think the day before, like maybe 2 days before Christmas, the Hawks fired Lon Kruger, and then Terry Stotts took over, and he had a tough position, because the team was sort of imploding. Things weren't really working out. The Glenn Robinson experiment wasn't working. And so he had to really deal with some pretty interesting personalities. And, and I think one of the big issues that he had split from George Karl, because they left him in Milwaukee. And so they had split, and that was sort of an issue that neither one of them really wanted to touch during that time, because they were really close, and then they didn't speak to each other. Like they just refused to speak to each other for a long time, and he never really wanted to get into the specifics as to what happened. But a lot of it had to do, I think, that he was just shocked that George Karl fired him, and that was just something that from that point on they never really. I think they've sort of mended fences to some extent, but not. They'll never be the same, and I think it's kind of crumbled from there. And so that was one of the interesting aspects of him. I know he had waited a long time to get his shot. They played at Oklahoma, and he was always had his reputation for being super smart. And I remember talking to people around the league, and a lot of people always say, the problem with Terry Stotts is that he's probably too smart for this, like because he's going to overthink everything. And that was one of the things that I think maybe became an issue, probably in other situations, when these were actually a playoff team. But I think overall, no one saw him as like failing in Atlanta. It was just a situation that just was never going to work out. I mean, from a GM change, ownership change, roster change, and just a rebuild. And once Billy Knight, had, cleared the decks, in terms of salary cap space in 2004, I think it was sort of a foregone conclusion that he was going to hire his own guy. And he wound up hiring Mike Woodson as the coach. And, then once they drafted Al Horford in 2007, they wound up having a pretty solid run of being a playoff team that just ended not too long ago. So, but it is, the thing about rebuilds, they never are quick, and they never happen as the way you would want. But I don't think anybody held the failures of that team against Terry Stotts. I think he was a guy who let his players have fun. He kind of let them do their thing within the structure. But he was, I would say, he's a player-friendly coach. You can see it now, what's happening in Portland, and just the freedom that he gives guys like T.J. McCollum and Damian Lillard.
Yeah. And I guess a final one, because I just thought about it. Boris Diaw is like, when you brought him up, I completely forgot that he was on the Hawks at that time. That was rookie Boris Diaw. How was his, like, you saw his adjustment to America and sort of just being in a new place. What was he like, especially in his rookie year?
He was the same. He was much skinnier. He was much skinnier, but the same complaints that hounded him from the minute he entered the league, and that San Antonio decided was actually his strength, was just that he was just too reluctant to shoot. He was so interested in passing. Everyone knew he had this incredible athleticism. He had all these gifts. He really wanted to. Magic Johnson was his favorite player. He wore 32 because he couldn't wear 13 because the big dog Robinson had 13. But he wore 32 in honor of Magic Johnson. And so he was just sort of this guy who would just get the ball. he would drive down the lane, and then he'd get at the rim. And once he got there, he had a layup or a dunk, he would kick it out. And everybody would start, and like the crowd sometimes would just moan, like, what is he doing? Like, why isn't he shooting? And like people would beg him to shoot, and teammates would beg him to shoot, and he just refused to shoot. He just wanted to be a playmaker. He wanted to be the facilitator. And, that's all fine and dandy. But, in the NBA, they play 5-on-5 offense. And if you're making it 5-on-4, you're actually putting a burden on your teammates by not shooting. And I think it never really registered for him. And that's one of the reasons why he wound up being traded, because Mike Woodson couldn't get to him, so he wanted to trade him to Phoenix. Then, he blew up there with Mike D'Antoni in that system as a playmaker, and sometimes scorer there. And then, then he wound up going to Charlotte, and then Paul Silas hated him because he refused to score. And then obviously he went to San Antonio, and they're like, okay, well, if you don't want to score, we'll just make you our point forward, and we'll just surround the team with shooters and let you work in the post and kick it out and do all your playmaking, and we'll ride that to a championship. And they did. And so it was just cool to see his growth, his development, but also how he went from being this real sleek, skinny, athletic kid to just having an everyman body and still playing the same way.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. That's not. You gave me so much great stuff, Mike. It was really interesting learning about the Hawks. I could imagine at that time how many rappers came to games. Well, I don't know if a lot of rappers came to games because of how bad the team was, but Atlanta scene was popping at that time. From Ludacris to Outkast. I could have. Wait, actually, let me think about it. Were there any like artists that came to games regularly, even with how bad that team was?
Nah, nope. Nobody went regularly. I mean, you would see like Jermaine Dupri or somebody show up when the Lakers came, but nah, they just, no one cared about the team and the city, and guys just didn't. No one showed up. I mean, like I said, there may have been guys like, when 2 Chainz was known as Titty Boy, he may have gone to games. I didn't know who he was back then, so he wasn't a star then. So there may have been rappers who did show up. I didn't know who they were back then. But you wouldn't see celebrities at games unless it was, the stars were there,
Yeah.
Tracy McGrady or, somebody like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a disappointing time, but an interesting time for the Hawks. Mike, thanks so much for taking the time to really to speak about all of this interesting stuff from that time with the Hawks. Team that was bad, but had a lot of interesting characters and also made a bunch of interesting trades at that time.
Yeah, they were a fun team, and so it's just cool to reminisce.
Yeah, no doubt. You can read Mike's stuff at The Athletic. He does a great job covering the whole entire NBA. What was your most recent story that maybe that people definitely should read?
I did a story profile Elton Brand, just how he wound up becoming a front office executive, and just sort of his journey from being like a number 1 overall pick to being a guy who's now being asked to build a championship team in Philadelphia.
Yeah. Well, and as we'll see what happens with the Sixers. We'll see if Anthony Davis becomes that other star, like you said, players who have been traded at the trade deadline and ended up winning a championship. I'm not saying he's going to beat the Warriors, but if he went to the Lakers,
no. But I honestly feel like some team, if he doesn't want to go, if they can't make a trade with the Lakers or the Celtics, I think like some team that's like right there, but not all the way there, should just go ahead and do him as a rental and just ride him out for the rest of the year, trying to win a championship, and then flip him in the summer. I feel like it's a worthy risk to take for a guy like Anthony Davis. And who knows, maybe he likes it and plays out another year, and you may win another, and then you can move on. Because, people always say the Pistons, they got that one championship. They should have drafted Carmelo, they should have drafted Chris Bosh or whatever. But if they had done that, they never would have traded for Rasheed, and they may not have ever won that championship. So you got to ask yourself, do you want 10 years of really good? Or do you want to have that championship banner hanging up? And that's kind of a question you kind of got to ask yourself.
Yeah, most definitely. Maybe Anthony Davis will become the next Rasheed or the next Pau Gasol in that kind of way, impacting his team and taking them to the finals or whatever. We'll see. But Mike, thanks so much for taking the time. This is the NBA Trades Podcast. Peace. This has been another episode of the NBA Trades Podcast. You can follow the page on Twitter, NBA_trades. You can like the page on Facebook, NBA Trades, and the podcast is available wherever you need it: YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, etc., etc. And subscribe, rate, and review. That would really help me out. So appreciate it, and thank you.